Da 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 da. Welcome to Disenfranchised. I'm Karen Bulinski Mathison, founder of TheNakedGrief, published author who brings lived experience, years of education, and the host of this podcast live to you every week at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a podcast where we look at disenfranchised grief through the lens of friends. Wondering what disenfranchised grief is? It's everything other than death. The stuff you don't get a casserole for. Here's how we do this. I give you a quick recap of the episode, then I'll call out the grief moments, and we'll name the coaching opportunities. The stuff you can actually do when grief shows up in real life. So today's episode is season 2, episode 3, The One Where Heckles Dies. This episode is kind of sneaky powerful because it is about a real death. Someone the group wasn't too fond of, and it still lands. It shows how grief doesn't ask permission, doesn't require closeness, and doesn't care whether the relationship was good. It also gives us a rare, honest grief arc where Chandler isn't only grieving the loss of Mr. Heckles, he's grieving the version of himself that he's afraid of becoming. So just a safety note, if anything, this episode hits a raw nerve, panic, intrusive thoughts, or feeling unsafe, pause the episode, ground your body, and reach out for the real-time support from someone that you trust or a local emergency resource. I love this episode because it's not a pretty grief. It's not a beloved character who we're grieving. He's kind of a villain in a way, you know? He tried to steal Marcel. He was constantly banging his broomstick on his ceiling because the Friends clan was being too loud. It's the death of someone the group kind of found annoying, and they still pause. They still soften, and they still show respect. Because grief doesn't only show up for the people we adored. Sometimes grief shows up for the people that we tolerated or avoided or even fought with. So Chandler tells the group he broke up with a woman because her nostrils were too big, and everyone calls him out for being superficial. This is important because it's not really about nostrils. It's about avoidance. It's about finding a tiny reason so you don't have to risk closeness. Has there been a time in your life when you found yourself do this? I know I'm raising my hand. Mr. Heckles does his usual, complains about the noise, bangs the broom, gets dismissed. The friends all stomp on the floor, and then he stops. And they found out later that he stopped because he died. This is one of the most realistic parts of death. Someone is there, and then they're not. And the silence is what tells you. Heckles' attorney shows up, and Monica and Rachel end up inheriting his belongings. Before they go down to the apartment, they're thinking, wow, we weren't even that nice to him. Who would have thought? And then they get down there and see what he left for them, and then they go, oh, he still managed to get us. His apartment's full of tacky items. Rachel loves the chaos, and of course, Monica hates it. And they fight about whose apartment some of these tacky items should live in. This is grief adjacent, conflict 101. When death enters the room, people start fighting about objects and territory because it's safer than talking about feelings. Chandler starts going through Heckles' things and finds evidence that Heckles also ended relationships for petty reasons. He also starts looking through Mr. Heckles' yearbook and discovers him and Mr. Heckles were very similar. They were in the same after-school activities. They were both labeled the class clown. And Chandler starts to feel like he's spiraling. I'm going to be just like him. This is the core grief arc. Again, Chandler isn't mourning Heckles as a friend. He's mourning the possibility that he's headed toward Bittertown, Aloneville, Hermit Junction. He's grieving his future self. Phoebe says she doesn't believe in evolution, sidebar here, and maybe even gravity, and Ross loses his mind trying to prove it. Phoebe pushes until Ross admits there's a tiny possibility he could be wrong, and then she flips it and shames him for caving. This subplot is comic relief, but it's also about the identity threat. Ross feels like his confidence and safety are being attacked. When people are dysregulated, they don't debate, they defend. Ross is here feeling like I've got a doctorate in, science and evolution. I study dinosaurs and fossils. I know that evolution exists. And Phoebe manages to make a really great argument where he goes, well, I guess it's possible. Chandler's terrified of ending up alone, so he calls Janice, always his backup, only to find out now she's married and pregnant, but she even throws the curveball. She can't just tell him on the phone. She walks into the coffee house and everybody gives Janice's hello by saying, oh my God. And she said, yeah, I had to come in just to see everybody's reaction. And then, of course, Chandler stalls and is like, well, wait, is it mine? And she has to clarify all of that. And this is grief-driven urgency. When death brushes past you, you start grabbing for certainty. You start trying to lock down a person, a plan, or a future. And Chandler does just that. Okay, Janice might not be his perfect, but she's always been the backup. They always circle back to each other. So maybe stability is what he needs more than anything else. Only to find out that's not an option anymore. So as the friends clear the last of Heckles' possessions out of his room, Monica makes up with Rachel by giving her the girly clock that she wanted. After she broke the fancy, awful lamp by accident that Rachel still thought was on purpose. And Chandler keeps Heckles' yearbook and leaves the broom by the door and says, goodbye, Mr. Heckles, we'll try to keep it down. That line is respect. It's closure. It's also the moment that Chandler admits you mattered because you were here. So grief comes in all shapes and forms. You can grieve someone that you didn't even like or hardly knew. The gang wasn't fond of Mr. Heckles. In fact, they mocked him. They dismissed him. Sometimes they were almost afraid of him. But when he dies, they still slow down. A coaching opportunity for the whole gang is to normalize that grief can show up even when a relationship was complicated, distant, or annoying. How often do we learn about somebody that we were once in touch with that passed? We may not have talked to them for years, but when we learn this, we still think back. We still have some regret of, oh, I should have reached out. They were on my mind. As we get older, we realize how temporary so many things in this world are, and we miss these moments. Life is short. We've always been told, carpe diem, seize the day. And yet, so many of us are so guilty of procrastination and putting things off until tomorrow. And tomorrow doesn't always come for some people. The silence after death. Heckles stops banging and the absence becomes the message. The coaching opportunity here is, it's important to talk about how grief is often first felt as a sensory change. Quiet, empty hallway, no footsteps, no texts. That silence is haunting. It echoes with us. It resonates in us. It triggers other feelings from other experiences. It's not always about Mr. Heckles. I mean, don't forget, it was only a season ago that Monica and Ross lost Grandma, or Nana. And his death may have, I mean, you only have 22 minutes in an episode, but it's very possible that it could have put one or both of them back to the day Nana died twice. It's that sudden, unexpected, unknowing, what could I have done different that comes up. When you're sorting through belongings and doing meaning making, the inherited items are junk, but they're also evidence of a life. He held on to those things for a reason. A coaching opportunity with this is teaching that going through belongings can be practical labor, emotional labor, and identity labor. Who were they? And who am I now that I know who they were and have known them? Chandler goes through the fear of, I'm him, I'm Mr. Heckles. I'm going to be the crazy man with all the snakes that the kids aren't going to want to knock on the door of for Halloween. Chandler sees his own patterns and reflected back at them. This is grief as a mirror. Death forces that self-audit. What am I avoiding? What am I postponing? What do I keep calling not a big deal that is actually my fear? Going back to the girl he dumped because her nostrils were too big. Or Janice has that crazy laugh and that constant, oh my God, voice. And he breaks down and calls her because he decides, I can look past all that. She's attractive, she's funny, and now she's not an option. The panic attachment after a death. Chandler calling Janice is a classic I need to not be alone move. He did the right thing by recognizing that he didn't want to be alone. He did the not so healthy thing by going backward to a person that he has chosen to break up with multiple times. The coaching opportunity is to normalize the grief urgency without shaming it. Then offer a grounding alternative. Don't make lifelong decisions from a 10-minute panic spike. Lean on your friends. Lean on your core support. Or do something productive. Like, I don't know, maybe he should have given the girl with the big nostrils a better chance. Because he said that she was wonderful other than... And then there's respect rituals. Even tiny ones are meaningful. Chandler's goodbye in Mr. Heckles' apartment is a ritual. Giving permission for small rituals that aren't religious or formal is important. Stating a sentence or writing it down. Creating a pause out of respect. Leaving something in a meaningful place. Or providing a private goodbye. A few years ago, on a personal note, I found myself in Vegas for work. And I was in a different point in my life. And I was ready to accept the moving forward. And I had, I still have my husband's ashes, but I had a tiny ladybug that had some of him in it. And he had never gone to Vegas. And it was my third trip since his passing. And I decided it was time, after carrying him with me all of those other adventures, to leave a part of him there. And I did that. It was releasing. It was therapeutic. It was my own private goodbye, while still having him here with me in a greater mass. But there's always something. And it doesn't have to be that big like what I just said. But anything can be helpful. So if this episode hits you, there's a few things that you can try. Name the fear, the thing that you're afraid of becoming is. Name the pattern, the way I protect myself is. And name one tiny opposite action. This week I will practice one small risk toward connection. Post-COVID, a lot of us found ourselves not wanting to be quite as social. You find peace in hiding behind a computer screen, or just avoiding places, avoiding crowds. And it takes a while to recondition yourself to get back into who you were prior to the shutdown. So challenge yourself. What's some ways that you can get back to who you once were without letting go of the person that you are growing into, or that you've already started to really like who you've become. Because sometimes grief isn't about missing a person. Sometimes grief is realizing you don't want to keep living the way you've been living. So if you're grieving someone you weren't close to, or someone you're not sure you're allowed to grieve, you're not broken. That's just part of being human. And if you're grieving the version of yourself you're scared you'll become, that's grief too. So next time, we'll keep going one episode, one grief moment, one honest conversation at a time as we discover the episode, the one with Phoebe's husband. But before that, I just want to remind you that at The Naked Grief, you'll find private, judgment-free space to process what's changed, practical tools, prompts, and guidance that you can use right away, multiple styles of support so you can choose what fits and switch if you need to. A path to find your footing, your own footing, one small step at a time. If you're not ready for therapy or one-on-one coaching yet, but you know you need something, you're in the right place at TheNakedGrief.com. Until next week, da 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 da.